Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. Paul de Chomedey de MAISONNEUVE was a French military officer and the founder of Ville-Marie, now the city of Montreal. Maisonneuve spent his early life in Champagne, France. Just before his 30th birthday, he was recruited to head up a mission on Montreal Island in New France. Maisonneuve was hired to lead the colonists and ensure their safety in the new land. In Quebec City, the Jesuits and Governor Montmagny tried to dissuade them from their undertaking on account of the war with the Iroquois. They felt this plan could not hold out against their raids. The scheme of this new company is so absurd, the governor said, that it would be better to call it the foolhardy enterprise. Sir, replied de Maisonneuve, what you say would be correct had I been sent to choose a site, but as it was determined by my company that I would go to Montreal, it is for me a question of honor, and you will find it good that I go up there to begin a colony, even though every tree of this island were to change into an Iroquois. Throughout the 17th century, the Iroquois were a military power to be reckoned with. Battles in 1626 brought them victory over the Mohican and gave them control over the Hudson Valley. They invaded the territory of the Huron in the 1640s, then intensified their campaign against the settlers of New France, including Montreal. The Jesuits described the Iroquois fearfully, as follows. They come like foxes in the woods. They attack like lions. They flee like birds. They could pass before our settlement in broad daylight and nobody would be able to pursue them or recover the captives they had seized. The Iroquois were masters at guerrilla warfare, striking with quick, devastating raids that kept their casualties to a minimum. The 12,000 members of the Five Nations, this number grew considerably through the practice of adopting prisoners, could summon 2,200 disciplined warriors. The little French colony on the St. Lawrence River had only 350 inhabitants. This tiny foothold was left to defend itself when the French crown refused to help. Beginning in 1643, the Iroquois attacked the outposts of Montreal, disrupting trading and agriculture. The Iroquois have shut down the entire trade in beavers, which has always been one of the great resources of the country, one Jesuit wrote. The Iroquois effectively seized control of the fur trade, blocking French access to the interior and preventing other native nations from trading with New France. From 1645, the colony was in a state of siege. Settlers no longer cleared the land. In 1643, 3 colonists were killed at the very foot of the palisade of Montreal. The next year, de Maisonneuve, founder and governor of the city, barely escaped death during an abortive sortie against 200 enemy warriors surrounding his fort. Throughout the following night, he could hear the screams of his comrades being tortured. This bad news stemmed the already waning tide of immigration to the fledgling colony and settlement in Montreal. Ville-Marie was born of a dream to bring pious natives and Frenchmen together to create a new people of God. In 1642, Ville-Marie was founded on the southern shore of the island of Montreal, where a chapel and a small settlement were built. A hospital under the leadership of Jeanne Mance was also established. Maisonneuve was the first governor of Montreal. The settlers maintained peaceful relations with the Algonquin people, one of the indigenous tribes of the area. The first year of the colony's existence was peaceful. In 1643, a flood threatened the city. Maisonneuve prayed to the Virgin Mary to stop the inundation and, when it abated, he erected a cross atop Mount Royal. A cross has been maintained there to the current day. Of the local First Nations tribes with whom these French settlers had contact with, the Mohawk, who were already trading with the Dutch and in New Amsterdam, now modern New York City, resented French efforts to interrupt the trade. The Mohawk were based in present-day New York State, south of Montreal, and severely threatened the new colony. The Algonquin, in contrast, maintained peaceful relations with the newly arrived Europeans. Nevertheless, they were often at war with the Haudenosaunee, better known as the Iroquois, who discovered the existence of the new French settlement of Montreal, whose defense Maisonneuve commanded using his military training. Already familiar with the terrain, the Haudenosaunee would often observe and engage the French settlers from the safety of the woods. That devastating strategy was the beginning of a long conflict between the groups as they were competing with each other for game and other resources. On March 30th, 1644, the situation came to a head. Warned by their guard dogs as to the nearby presence of their enemies, a band of 30 settlers went into the forest to face their foes. Once in the woods, the French encountered 250 Haudenosaunee people in ambush, waiting for them. Retreating in the face of such uneven odds, Maisonneuve remained last so that the others could make it safely back to the fort, resulting in him being set upon by an Iroquois chief. In this decisive moment, Maisonneuve fired twice on the chief, thus killing him before returning to the safety of the fort amid much fanfare. In 1645, Maisonneuve received news that his father had died, and he returned to France. There, he was offered the position of governor of New France but turned it down, wanting to continue his leadership of Ville Marie. Maisonneuve returned to Montreal in 1647, and the wars with the Iroquois continued. In 1649, Maisonneuve stood as godfather for the first white child baptized in the colony. She was Pauline Hébert, the daughter of the fur trader Augustin Hébert and his wife Adrienne du Vivier, who had come to Montreal in 1648 with Maisonneuve and their elder daughter Jeanne. In the spring of 1651, the Iroquois attacks became so frequent and so violent that Ville Marie thought that its end had come. Maisonneuve made all the settlers take refuge in the fort. By 1652, the colony at Montreal had been so reduced that he was forced to return to France to raise 100 volunteers to go with him to the colony the following year. If the effort had failed, Montreal would have been abandoned and the survivors relocated downriver to Quebec City. When the 100 arrived in the fall of 1653, the population of Montreal was barely 50 people. They included Jacques Archambault, who dug the first well on the island in 1657, at the request of Maisonneuve. Over time, the colony grew in size and eventually was large enough to be secure from the Iroquois threat. Ownership of the colony was transferred from the Missionary Society to the Sulpicians as New France had been proclaimed a royal province in 1663. Governance of Montreal was assumed by the Governor-General and the Sovereign Council. In 1665, Alexandre de Prouville de Tracy, the Lieutenant General of New France, ordered Maisonneuve to return to France on indefinite leave. After 24 years as head of the colony, he left Montreal for good. Settling in Paris, Maisonneuve lived in relative obscurity. In 1671, he welcomed Marguerite Bourgeois at his home in Paris. With his encouragement, she had established the Congregation of Notre-Dame of Montreal in 1653, an order of teaching nuns that educated French and Indigenous children. Maisonneuve died in Paris in 1676. After his death, honors were bestowed, including St. Paul Street in Montreal was named after Maisonneuve, who had built his home in 1650 on the early street. Nuns Island was once called St. Paul Island in honor of the founder of Montreal. A lavish Maisonneuve monument was erected in 1895 on Place d'Armes in Haut-Montreal to his memory. It is the work of Louis-Philippe Hébert. An imaginary model was used to represent Maisonneuve, as no authentic portrait exists of the first governor of Montreal. De Maisonneuve Boulevard and Rue Chomedey in downtown Montreal are named for him, as are Maisonneuve Park, Maisonneuve College, the neighborhood of Chomedey in Laval, and the Maisonneuve Pavilion, a dormitory at the Royal Military College Saint-Jean, located in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, 25 miles south of Montreal. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.